able to
This
hear my voice?
conference will now be recorded.
Can anyone please confirm if you're able to hear my voice and see my screen, guys?
Yeah,
Yes.
Kiran, we can.
Sir.
Okay, great. Yes, guys. So, any questions from yesterday's session? So, we were just setting the basic agenda on how do we write a YAML file, what are the basics of YAML, and what is an Azure DevOps pipeline outline. We do not really go into and discuss about the Azure DevOps pipeline out here as such. But anyone, any questions still here?
Kiran, I have a question actually.
Hmm? Good, please.
So, Kiran, I prepared a ARM template, and
Mm-hmm.
in the template I have given the app service I'm deploying. So uh, at the time of deploying, in the in the build also completed, and at the time of
Mm-hmm.
release, it's showing
Mm-hmm.
an error. Like I have not
Okay.
given app service name properly, incorrectly, and all.
Okay.
Is there a possibility to validate that ARM template, whether it's a compiling kind of compilation to verify there are no errors like that? How to
So,
track if
firstly,
error?
before you deploy the template, right, what you can do is if you look into your, sorry, I have my DevOps pipelines open. So, if I look into my DevOps pipeline out here, so this was your ARM template deployments or something like that. It's trying to create the infrastructure out here. What you can do is that just create a simple task out here, put this in, just say that this is a validation, whether it's compiling or not, just say validation, just scroll down, and there is something called as a deployment mode, and you are putting a deployment mode called incremental. Just click on this, say validation only. This will just go ahead, validate your ARM template, and if it fails here, it won't even deploy your ARM template out here as such. Since I added a validation step. Again, you do not really have to do this, but if you have a requirement in such a way, you can. But if you look at your templates, before going in and deploying the template out there, it will do an internal validation. So if you look at this, it's starting to validate your template and stating template validation successfully completed. Only if this is successfully completed, it will go ahead and initiate a deployment out here as such. And it means template validation, I'll just check the syntaxes of your template to see everything is okay or fine or not or something like that. So yes, if you have something like that particular requirement, you can change the template out here to just do a validation, and then you can go ahead and let's say create the infrastructure. But this validation is internally done when you are creating the infrastructure out here, so that should be good enough out here as such. Does that answer your question? And is this what you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, Kiran. But outside we cannot identify. Only after we execute here in the release, then only we will get to know what are the errors, right? So
Exactly,
before
because you're doing an infra as a code. Yes.
we
Before
can't
that,
do.
you can't do that because you're not deploying your template directly from a local machine, are you? You're not doing that, right? So that's the reason we do not really identify those issues, and this is exactly the reason why we have a development environment, right? Because if it fails, let it fail. We'll correct it out so that that failure is not replicated in higher environments like QA, staging, production, and all these things out here as such.
Okay, Kiran. Thank you.
All right. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions out here as such? And I'm just curious, were you able to resolve that particular error on your template, Ramakrishna?
Kiran, can you repeat once?
Yeah, were you able to resolve the error that you had in your
Yeah,
template?
I'm able to resolve that again. So first I did a custom, and it went
Hmm.
properly. But through the
Okay.
release, I given the app service name incorrectly in that parameter. So
Okay.
and after that I corrected that one. But I just wanted to learn from you that is there a
Hmm.
possibility where we can do a head compilation kind of like in C++ we will compile that
Hmm.
program similar
Yes.
way.
Yes,
like
so
that.
yes, you can add a validation step, yes, but we need the release pipeline to tell us that that the template is failing or something like that. And also, if you all remember, right, see ARM template deployment even via pipeline is very simple. It'll just go and use a PowerShell script and try to deploy it out. So it'll do a new -az resource group deployment. So when we did it on our local machine, right, what we did is that we said new -az resource group deployment and give the template and all that stuff. And finally, we added a flag called -debug. We said debug mode, and the debugging mode will do one simple thing. It'll go ahead and give you additional logs. Sometimes what happens is that the logs that you're getting from a pipeline might not be sufficient or might not be good enough to troubleshoot your issues out there. So what we try to do is that we try to run a deployment in a debug mode or release pipelines in a debug mode. How do you do that? Very simple. Just go into your variables, add a variable called system.debug, and just set a variable value called true, a boolean, true or false. And just save this out, saying debug mode. And if I go and create a release out here as such, now I have a release 4 right now. That's now getting triggered. This release is taking this particular value called system.debug is equal to true. So it's now the release is now set to run on a debug mode out here. And if you now go ahead and let's say run this release out, this is going to give you some debugging logs out here as such. So it's going to give you some debugging logs out here as such. So if you look at this, let's give it a second or something to load these files and all that stuff. And if you now go through the logs right now, you should be able to get all those debug logs out here that are coming through. So for example, these are all my debug logs. This is normally something that I don't get. All these logs is normally something that I don't really get out here. So this is for additional understanding of how the error is. And again, if you see this, it's telling what is the subscription ID, what all these are, and how it's going and hitting this particular subscription, where is the error and all that stuff. And if there were an error, and in my case, yeah, I'm doing a validation right now. So if there were an error, it should have thrown me some error out here, and validation got succeeded. Now it's going and creating the infrastructure out here and so on and so forth out here such. So if it fails somewhere, it will clearly tell you at which line it's failing, what call it's failing at. Is it a get call? Is it a put call? Is it a delete call? What exactly is failing? And this will give you some additional tools in order to let's say work out. And the variable out here is called system.debug. I set it to true. If you don't want it, you can just go ahead and set it to false out here as such. You can just say false and have a default value called false. And in cases where you need this particular value, you can change it again back into true out here as such. So that's one of the let's say tools that are available in order for us to go ahead and let's say start doing some troubleshooting out here, some basic troubleshooting out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys?
Kiran, what
Mhm.
is the difference between these service connections in the project level and in the organization level? We also have a service level in organization level.
Can you point where exactly did you see at the organization level, please? Because there shouldn't be a service connection at the organization level is what I'm sure about. So I'm at the organization setting and I don't see the service connection out here as such. Can you just help me, let me know where exactly did you find that?
Actually, I'm unable to recollect now. So, and one more thing, Kiran, like
Hmm.
if your service connections are created for that project, we have to use that project only. It will not be used for other projects.
Good question. Yes, service connections are project specific. They are or they can only be used by that project out here. So for example, if you see here, this is my service connection called sample SVC that is running in a project called 8am sample project. And if I just duplicate this out, if I go into a different project out here called 9am project, I don't have the same service connection out here. Like I have different service connections out here, but you can share service connections. You can share service connection between project. How do I do that? Just click on the service connection, more actions, security. Now you have the pipeline permissions, you have project permissions. It's telling only the current project is using this particular service connection. You can also share this by adding multiple projects out here. For example, I'll also add a 9am project. I'll say okay. And now if I go into the 9am service connections, I'll just say refresh here. And I now have a sample SVC, which is shared. This is a shared service connection out here that is coming from a different project out here as such. So you can go ahead and share the service connection rather than creating a new one for each and every project out here as such.
Correct, correct. Like this is a kind of parameter. If we change in the main project, if we
Mhm.
change any settings, that will impact in all
All
sharing
these,
projects.
all the yes, that's correct.
But normally in real time, you will do this one, Kiran, like in the higher production also, like such kind of
Very rare
in.
cases. Normally, what in a real time we do is that we try to maintain different service connections for different environments. For example, I will have one particular service connections for development, QA, staging, all these things, right? Pre-production environments. I'll have one particular service connection, and even in a real-time environment, right? So you will have a subscription change between pre-production and production. So right now, I just have one subscription in my Azure portal. I just have one subscription where I'm creating all my resources in. But when you start working in a real-time environment, right, you would have multiple subscriptions, one for pre-prod, one for prod. So you'll have a service connection, or you'll have a subscription called pre-production. You'll have a subscription called production, and I will have two different service connections out here. One for pre-prod, one for prod. Pre-prod will only have the access to pre-prod. Prod will only have the access to production. And also the access levels will change, and also the identity and access management is also going to change. This is how I make a separation, a watertight separation between my resources running inside the same tenant, but I can have it under different subscriptions out here so that I can efficiently isolate who has the access to what. I can put that line of separation telling that, okay, fine, pre-production is only, let's say for this one, production is only being used by the client and so on and so forth out here as such. Does that answer your question? That's how things work in a real-time environment out here as such.
Okay, Kiran.
Yes, any more questions, guys? Again, one thing that you have to understand, guys, is that see, I'm able to do all those things in my Azure DevOps portal. I'm able to share my service connections. I'm able to, do all those things. Reason being, I am the administrator of the project, but you might not have the same role while you go ahead and start working in an organization. You might not have a role of an administrator. There is a lot of limitation when you go there. So you only basically can have, let's say, access to the pipelines, probably repositories, creating the branches. Probably you cannot add users because there might be a different administrator who's adding the users out there and so on and so forth out here such. So yes, there is a proper division when you actually start working. But since we are doing demos here, right? We normally have the admin privilege. We can do anything in our subscriptions out here, and we have to do anything in our subscription out here. Reason being, we'll have to learn in that way out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys, before I get started?
In that situation, the role and
Hmm.
who will give the service connections, Kiran, for us for DevOps? Like if I am not a
Hmm.
admin in the real
Hmm.
time.
So, you see, normally what happens is that there might be project administrators out there, and also you might not even have the access to create an app registration onto the Azure Active Directory. I'm able to create all these things because I have a role called global administrator. In my case, not this per sorry, in my case, I'm a user who's a global administrator out here. You might not have this role at all. So I am the user, and if I look at my role called class Azure DevOps, I'm the global administrator, can manage all the aspects of the Active Directory. But when you go into the organization, you might not be a global administrator. You might have a global administrator who can create the app registration for you, take the secret of the app registration, store it inside a key vault, and give the access to you on a key vault out here. So we've seen key vaults, right? So we've seen how do you secure your secrets. So you can take the app registration secret, put it in a key vault, app registration ID, put it in key vault. and you can then give that to your DevOps team, telling that, okay, fine, you know what, if you have the access, you can go ahead and create it. Or if you have an administrator who has the access, you can give those secrets to that particular administrator. They will help you create the app registration out there as such. Again, the app registration, service connections, all these things, right? This is something that we set up at the beginning of the project. So not in the between of the project, because at the beginning, these are all the, let's say, basic things that are required. And once we set up, we go ahead with the flow by using these things out here as such. So you might not have the permission to create it, but you might have the privilege to use it. That's the difference.
Normally, Kiran, when we join in the DevOps project, like
Hmm.
when we join the project, what role
Hmm.
we will get initially, how the role, what role will be assigned for
See,
DevOps
there is
engineer?
no hard and fast rule that there should be a proper role that is assigned for a DevOps engineer out here, and what kind of role will be performing initially. So to answer those questions, again, it depends upon the team size that you're getting into. Say, I've worked in teams where I was the only DevOps engineer. If I'm the only DevOps engineer, I have to do everything, like, setting up CIC. So the
You will get
basic,
everything.
yeah, you have to do everything because you're the only DevOps engineer in that particular project, right? So
Yeah.
you have to set up your CI/CDs, you have to set up your repositories, you have to put your policies, you have to make sure that the pipelines don't fail. If it fails, you have to work with the developers and so on and so forth. So this usually happens in small projects where, let's say, there are not more than, let's say, 10 or 15 developers or something like that. Now that was one of the case scenarios. I've also worked in projects where there were about 30, 40 DevOps engineers out here. Very big projects I'm talking about, where thousands of developers are there, wherein you're already working in a proper flow. In that case, you have time to go ahead and, let's say, explore things out. They will go and give you KTs and all that stuff. It depends. It completely depends upon the project that you fall into. Depending upon that, your roles may vary. You might sometimes perform an administration role. You might perform sometimes only a DevOps role. I've also worked in projects where I was just a build administrator, creating builds. I don't have access on releases out here as such. So the roles might vary, but on a very broader way, it will always stick to Azure DevOps and also the Azure portal. It's an administration plus a DevOps role out here that we normally kind of play out here as such.
Okay, Kiran.
And having that said, let's go ahead and let's outline
Yeah,
our strategy today. Sorry, go ahead, please. Lokesh, you have a
yeah,
question?
Kiran, in real-time scenario, which one most of the people are using, YAML or GUI?
Right now, it is YAML. If you asked me the question about a year ago, I would have said a GUI. But right now, a lot of projects are moving towards YAML based approaches. A lot of projects which are there, even in the GUI based scenario, even the GUI based, let's say, setup, are moving towards YAML. And that's clearly evident. Even if you go and look into the Microsoft documentations, even they are recommending you all to follow YAML out here. Probably in, let's say, the next couple of years, let's say about 5 years or something, they might phase out GUI. That's the talk normally that's going around in the industry. They might phase out GUI. So YAML is the clear future out here as such.
Okay, Kiran. Thank you.
Right, any more questions, guys? So let's see. So when I go ahead and try writing a YAML pipeline, it's always a trigger. I need to define a trigger, then the stages. Inside that, at least start with one stage and the agent that the stage needs to run on, the jobs, the steps, and the tasks. This is the hierarchy on how you need to design a pipeline. And again, I will come back to this particular documentation telling Azure pipeline documentations out here. And I'll again and again come back to this particular image in order to get an idea of how to start writing a YAML pipeline for, let's say, myself. And also, one quick tip that I would like to give you all is that, see, before writing a YAML pipeline, right, in a development environment or in, let's say, in your own Azure DevOps project, just create a GUI. I mean, just create a pipeline using the GUI to understand the workflow, because this is easier to understand the flow. YAML is not that easier to, let's say, go ahead and understand the flow out here. This is easier to understand the flow. So just go ahead, give yourself a reference pipeline out here, see if it is working. And based on this, what I normally do is I start writing my YAML. And the best way to start writing a YAML is not VS Code, meaning the best way to start writing a YAML for Azure DevOps is not a VS Code. It is the Azure DevOps UI itself. The Azure DevOps UI is an excellent tool in order to start writing pipelines. It has built-in sorry, it has built-in tools that will help you fill up your YAML pipeline. So how do I do that? I'll just say new pipeline. And right now, till now, we've been selecting use classic editor. I'll now say use Azure repos git, and I'll take up my repository called let's say, what is that, SQL DevOps. Yes, SQL DevOps. I'll just take up this particular repository, and I'll just scroll down, and I'll say a starter pipeline. This is for me to write. I'm not running my pipelines. This is just for me to write out here, write my files out here. And now I have one simple code out here, something like this. I'll delete everything. It's now telling this is the name of the file that I have. I'll just name it in a different way, telling that this is build.yml. It's a build pipeline that I want to start writing. And it's telling yes, this pipeline will be saved under this particular repository as build.yml. Go ahead, start writing this out. Again, coming back to my pipeline documentation, starts with a trigger. So what I'll do is, let me expand the screen slightly a little bit. Let me collapse this out, and let me start writing out here. So what I'll do is that I'll just say control plus space to load everything. VS Code doesn't really do that. Azure DevOps UI does this out, and I'll say trigger, and I'll put a manual integration right now. So I'll say none. A manual integration. After the trigger comes my stages. So what I'll do is I'll just again do a control space. I'll say stages. As and when I do that, if you observe, it is automatically put a hyphen and it's waiting on the next line. Now it's telling what do you want to do? Do you want to give a stage, or do you want to give a template? We'll talk about what's a template and all that stuff is. I'll say stage to begin with, let's say to begin with my journey, and I'll say enter. I'll get my cursor exactly under the S of the stage, because all these are the properties of the stage that I'm now declaring. Now it's telling, do you want to give probably the display name for the stage? I'll say yes, I want to give a display name. I'll say this is a build stage. And it's telling some condition, jobs, and all that stuff. Very importantly, I'll need to declare the pool on which the agent, or the agent pool on which the stage needs to run. The agent pool out here. Again, I need to now give the properties of the pool. So I need to come under the pool. So I'm doing a tab under the pool out here right now. So these are all the properties of the pool that I'm declaring. So I said pool, I came under the pool right now. And in order to declare a self-hosted pool, sorry, a hosted pool out here, because I don't have a self-hosted right now. If you look at this, I just said Azure pipelines. I said the virtual machine specification is something like Windows 2019. What I can do is I can say VM image colon, say something like Windows 2019, something like that. I can declare this out. Or if you have a self-hosted pool, now I'm telling, if you have a self-hosted pool, you can give the name of the pool. You can give something like the name of the pool out here as such. I'll just comment this out. Reason being, I'm running my, sorry, shit. I am running my pipeline on let's say a hosted agent out here. So let me take a starter. I lost this out. I'll say none. The stages. I'll say stage. I'll just go ahead and give a display name to this particular stage, telling that this is a build. I'll just go ahead and say the pool here. So let's say the pool here, come under the pool and give something called a VM image, say Windows 2019, and let's change the name of this file also. I just lost this out by mistake. Now I have the pool. So I have the stage. Inside the stage, I'm declaring what is the name of the pool that I'm going to use. And if in case this is a self-hosted pool that you want to use, just give the name value pair, the name and the value called self-hosted. Let's comment this out, but I'm just giving this as the declaration of a self-hosted pool. If you have a self-hosted, you can do this out here as such. And then comes, sorry, then comes my jobs out here. Before I do the job, right? See my pipeline, when you look at my pipeline out here, it depends upon certain variables. For example, there is a variable called configuration, called build configuration, meaning the configuration in which you want to build this out. And there are different configurations available like debug and release and all these things out here. And all these variables are declared on the pipeline. How did I declare it? No. Then I just created a classic, it went ahead and declared these out. And there is something called build platform, which is never used, but always good to have these variables out here as such. So what I'll do is under my stage, I go ahead, tell variables. And if I want to declare variables, again, I'm coming under the variables. It's a child property and I'll give the key value pair. So I'll just go into my classic pipeline that I have. This is the key, pasting this in, colon, the value. Just go ahead, give the value out here. If I have one more variable, I'll say something like build platform, in, and this is any space CPU. Since it has a space, I don't want my YAML to get confused. So I'll put it under quotes to tell both of them are, let's say, one and the same variable out here as such. So you can go ahead, declare multiple variables, and the syntax is a simple key value pair definition out here, and all of them are falling under the stage. So stage, it's a display name, it's a pool name, and these are all the, let's say, additional items under the stage. And also each and every item out here has its own subproperty. By giving an indentation, I'm going inside this, giving a subproperty out here, and this is a stage which comes under something called stages. And finally, what I'm going to do is once I declare all these things, I'll say jobs. So it's as and when I do a job, it's understanding that yes, there is again child properties that come under the job, and I'll say job out here, under which, so I'm coming under the J of the job, under which again I can have multiple things like the display name of the job. I can say build or some random display name out here as such, or I'll say build job one, something like that. And then the steps under which I need to sorry, under which I need to now start adding my tasks. So I have the steps. Under the steps, there are tasks out here. So this is the hierarchy again. The stages, stage, the display name of the stage, the pool and all that stuff, the variables and everything that I'm giving. Jobs under which I have a job. Under the job, I have a step. Under the step, I'll now start adding my tasks out here, and tasks are all these things: restore, build, publish, copy, all these, let's say, things out here such. So what I'm going to do is that there are two ways in which you can go ahead and add your task. If you have a classic pipeline already for your reference, if you click on a sorry, if you click on a task, you can view the YAML definition of this task. You can copy this out. You can paste it out like this, but again, there's going to be a misalignment, so you have to make sure to align this properly. You can paste it out like this. This is one of the ways, but again, this is also a little tougher is what I feel. So very simply, what you can do is that put your cursor under your steps out here. You have something called show assistant. Click here, and I want to do a .NET restore. So I'll click here, I'll say restore. It's now asking me where is my project. I'll just go get my project path. So this is the code. Inside that I have SQL app. Inside that SQL app, inside that I have that particular SQL SQL project. Copy this out from here, paste this out here as such. And there's something called arguments. And if you look at my earlier pipeline, right, there are no arguments out here. So I'll say, okay, fine, good enough. I'll just go ahead and restore it the way it is. Make sure that the cursor is in the right place. Just add. So now I have the first task, which does a restore. Command here is the restore. Part to the project is this particular project out here. And you can optionally add something called as a display name under the task. This is for my ease of understanding. I'll say .NET restore to understand what exactly my tasks are doing. I'll just go ahead and do that. After that, I have a build. So again, making sure my cursor is under this particular, let's say, hyphen. I'll just put this as build. I'll give the path to the project. I've already copied that out. And in the arguments, I just had one argument telling that please build my project in a configuration called, let's say, release, which is a variable. So let's copy this out. Is it under the arguments out here? I'll say add. Second task, which is now telling do a build, and I can add a display name to this, telling it is .NET build. Then I have a .NET publish. So again, coming here, I'll say publish. I'll just give the path to the project once again. This one, sorry, path to the project once again. And in the arguments, it's telling where do you want to store the project in. And if you look at your classic pipeline, it is arguments telling configuration is build configuration. The output directory is build.artifact staging directory, meaning place it inside the artifact staging directory. So I'll copy these arguments out here, paste it in here from a classic pipeline. Making sure my cursor is under this, let's say, tier of the task. I'll say add this out and give a name to this. Telling that the display name out here is .NET publish. Then if you look at my classic, I have two tasks, one to copy the infrastructure, the other to copy the SQL files out here and store them under the artifact staging directory. So all I'll do simply is just go ahead, take my cursor here, making sure that my cursor is under the T of the task out here. Yes. Copy files. It's select the folder location. This is the folder location out here, which is infra. Say copy all the contents to the target folder called build.artifacts directory. So if you look at this, it's the artifact staging directory. So I'm just saying artifact staging staging directory out here as such. So I'm copying all the contents into something called build.artifact staging directory. I'll say add. Now add one more task, and I'll just give a display name out here telling copying infra files. Similarly, now I'll just copy this out, paste this in. Again, I have to be a little careful out here while pasting this out here. Let's go ahead and do an enter. Let's see what's the issue with this. Yes, the display name is slightly not aligned. Let me do a tab here. Fine, that's the issue. Let's see the tasks. The task is all good. It's not under the T. Fine. Let me directly add this out. Better I do this instead of, let's say, putting something else out here as such. So let's do one more copy task out here, and I'll say that let's go here. It's SQL commands. This is the folder in which I want to copy out all the files. into something called as build.artifact staging directory once again. So I'll say build.artifacts artifact staging directory. I'll add this out. Looking good. And I'll just say display name out here is copy SQL files. And finally, I'll have one more task to publish the artifacts. So I'll say publish. I have a task called publish build artifacts out here and add this out here as such. You can also have a display name out here, but this is my entire file as such. Starting with trigger, then I have a stage. I have stages multiple, sorry. And inside that, I have a stage with a display name called build, which is running on a pool called Windows 2019 server. This is a so this is an Azure hosted pool. And then I have declared a syntax commenting out, telling that if you have a self-hosted pool, you can declare it in the form of self-hosted pool out here. The variables for your pipeline that your pipeline really uses out here as such. Then you have the jobs. You have something called job. Inside that, you have something called steps, and all my steps follows: restore, build, publish, and also copying my files out here, and finally producing my artifacts out here as such. Again, I am taking the reference of a classic build pipeline in order to create a YAML file. I haven't created a pipeline yet. I went into the pipeline. I said I want a pipeline, but I haven't created this out. I'll just save this out. It's asking, do you want to directly commit onto the develop branch? It will not really allow me to commit onto the develop branch right now. So I'll say that this is initial YAML file. I'll say create a new branch called feature YAML Azure Devops, something like that. I'll just save this out. So now it's telling yes, there's some issues detected related to pipeline because I have not, let's say, run this pipeline. I've not really created a pipeline right now. I just created a file into a branch called feature something, and this is my entire file out here. And the reason I went through the pipeline route, it's because it's easier for me to write it. And I now have a file. Now what I'll do is I'll now create a pull request between these two branches. I'll say this is the initial file. Yes, it's already, there's a pull request out here. I don't think I have a work item to link it with this one. So I'll say create a YAML file for build pipeline. And I'll use this particular, let's say, work item out here in order to make sure that my pull request goes through. So if I go into my pull request, I have my pull request out here. I'll just add that particular work item in here. Once that's done, I'll set up this to autocomplete. I'll approve this out. And once it's done, now it will automatically trigger this particular pipeline that I have because this is already configured to go for continuous integration. I can cancel this out because I do not want to really use my classic pipeline anymore. I can deprecate this out. I can cancel this particular pipeline out here. And to make sure that my future releases don't get triggered or my future builds don't get triggered, I'll just edit my pipeline, remove the trigger, and also there is something called options. I'll disable the pipeline out. I'll say classic pipeline disabled because I'm coming via the YAML route. I don't want to yet delete my pipeline right now because I just want to, let's say, take this as a reference. Save. So I've disabled my pipeline, also disabled the triggers of my pipeline so that future references do not really trigger this out. And in my develop branch of, let's say, my pipeline out here, I have something called build.yml out here as such. It's a file. I haven't created a pipeline. So now what I'll do finally is I'll come to pipelines. I'll say new pipeline. I'll say Azure DevOps, let's say get. I'll say SQL DevOps, one same thing that I did earlier. But earlier I was just writing a pipeline. Now I will use that particular file. How do I use that? I'll just scroll down. It's telling startup pipeline. I'll say use an existing pipeline or use an existing file that I already have. And inside this particular branch, I have a build.yml. It's identifying that there's a file out here. I'll say continue. I'll say run. Now this is creating a pipeline for me with this particular name called SQL Devops 1. Of course, you can change the name at a later point in time. And now it's triggering out this particular pipeline. Again, same thing that happens in a classic. I'm now producing this out in a YAML out here as such. So now if you see the SQL DevOps one, it's taking the name of the repository. Of course, I can change the name of the pipeline out here as such. Now it's just waiting for the job to get completed and all that stuff. So let's wait for this to happen. String current queue position is 1, parallelism is 0. Why is that exactly? Let's see what is right now running in my queue. I have a hosted. Okay, let's see. So it takes some time to, let's say, pull this out. So we'll wait for a minute or so. Okay, what happened to my pool? Let's go ahead, take my pool out here. Let's see if there's any job that is running out here. There is none. This is waiting for this one to get picked up. It's telling the agent is not running. Current queue position is 1, current parallelism. Okay, fine. This is fine, not a problem at all. Let's give it a minute or so to pick this up and let's check this out. But in total, this is how I have designed my YAML pipeline out here by taking a classic pipeline as a reference. And from there, I went ahead and I started using all these commands in order to produce a file. And this is just a build pipeline that I produced. I haven't gone into the releases out here yet. It's just a build pipeline basically that I have done out here. Which pipeline will be used in real time, classic or YAML? The question is already answered. It is YAML. It's going to be YAML out here as such. So whenever, if you're into a new project, it's going to be YAML as such. And some issue with my pipelines out here. So it's telling the images Windows 2019 pool is Azure pipelines. It's able to identify that it's an Azure pipeline. It's just waiting for let's say my pipeline trigger. The agent is not running, current position to queue, current parallelism request is 0, maximum parallelism request type is equal to 1. Let's see why it is not really running out here as such. Is there any other pipeline that is there in the queue? Not too sure, but
Do
let's
we
see.
have the image
Hmm.
2019 Windows 2019?
We should have the image out here.
I think we
Let's
do.
see. Azure pipeline documentations, agent image, agent pool image. There should be an image called 2019, and it does have an image called Windows 2019 out here as such. It's a Windows 2019. This is the VM label, and this is all the included software. So it should be there in. I mean, it should be there. The Windows 2019 image is there. And this is what I'm trying to use out here in my pipelines. If it's not there, right, it would have thrown me an error by now. But it is there. The image is actually there out here as such. But I'm not too sure why it is not picking up right now. Let's see. Look at this. This is a classic label is Windows 2019, Windows-2019 out here as such. Or I can also use a Windows latest. This normally works out, but I can check why this isn't there. It's a 2019 server. This is good enough. And I feel there is something, there's some issue with the image only as such. The default image for the classic build pipeline is Windows 2019. The default image for YAML build pipeline is an Ubuntu latest. That's the default, and designate a pool inside your pipeline. I had my pool VM image and Windows latest, Ubuntu latest, something like that. Let me do one thing. If I have to make sure that this is not the one, let's remove the code. Somehow I feel, I mean, of course, this shouldn't be, let's say, the issue. Somehow I feel that this is not really picking up out.
Yes, Kiran, sure.
I will try to, let's say, edit this, but if I want to edit this, I have to create a feature branch. So let me do that real quick. Again, part of the testing. So let's see. Feature, let's say Kiran image test, something like that. I will go ahead change my image out here to Windows 2019 as suggested in the documentation. Edit this out. So documentation suggests to put something like that. And I'm committing this one to my feature branch and I'm not triggering my pipeline. So what I'll do is I'll just cancel this particular run. And what I'm now going to do is that I'll just run this pipeline, but this time around I'll run this from a feature branch. So I can do that for my testing. I can go ahead and let's say try doing that out here as such. So yes, it's telling current queue position is 1. Why is my queue really stuck? Let's look at this. So there's one queued job out here. It's waiting for Windows 2019 to be picked up. And this is the same job out here as such. Current queue position is 1, but it's really failing to pick this one out. This is DFS agent. This is good enough. Yeah, sometimes you have the issue with that particular agent. Not sure why. Let me try one more thing.
More than one agent, we have to pay the
No, you
money.
don't have to. No, you don't have to. I'm just going ahead with one agent. That's it, right? So there's no more. There's no another agent out here. I just have one request in the queue, so I'm just requesting for an agent. So it should be there in place. If a classic pipeline is able to trigger this out, even a YAML should trigger this out. But I need to check why this isn't. But let me do one thing. Let me change this out to Windows latest. Usually works for me. Let me cancel this pipeline out once again. I'll have to check why this isn't, let's say, picking this out when it's a Windows 2019. That's something that I have to check this out. I'm just wondering, this probably might be a bug in the UI. I'm not too sure. Yes, current queue position is 1. It's also failing to pick this out here right now. All right, I need to check that out. But yes, normally I have my queues out here right now. Let's check this. Is there anything that got stuck in the queue? Nothing that got stuck in the queue. Everything is cancelled. And this job is still waiting for the agent to be allocated here just now. And I have, let's see, I have one free parallel job out here that is running, but I need to check this out. Yes, I can check this out at a later point in time, but yes, just to try this out at your end, this is the entire YAML file out here as such. Let me know if it is running for you. Let's see what's the issue at my end, because it's not really able to pick up that particular agent. So I feel
Sure,
some issue with the agent out here as such, but
sure.
yes, uh,
There may be a sync issue or server issue is also right. Like
that's what I even feel out here as such. I will also try to run a classic pipeline and see if that is picking up, because earlier when I ran a release pipeline, it picked up the agent. So it shouldn't be the agent issue. For some reason, I feel there is something that is not right out here, but I can check that out. But
yeah,
you can use this particular YAML file for now. So the idea here is to take this particular YAML file and run a pipeline out of that particular YAML file, and do let me know how that run goes. What I want is to know is what is the syntax of this particular YAML definition. How exactly can we write that particular syntax out here as such, and how exactly we can go ahead use this particular file in order to create our pipelines out here as such. And now we have a pipeline. Of course, yes, there is some issue with the pipeline not getting triggered out because of, let's say, the agent issue or something like that. We can check that out, but please try this out and let me know how it works at your end out here as such.
sure,
Any
Kiran.
questions? Yes. Mhm.
One question, Kiran. Like
Good.
normally, the way how you wrote, right? Normally we have to
Mhm.
follow the same, right? Like by seeing the in the classic by steps and
Mhm.
all, we have to write the ML code like
Initially, yes. At a later point in time, you wouldn't even need to look at, let's say, a classic.
as we are
You'll directly
familiar
go ahead and
with.
start. Yeah. Yes, you're familiar with that. So it's all about the practice. So initially, you can use a classic as a reference and then go ahead and write a YAML file out of it. That's the best way to approach this out.
Normally,
Yeah.
and when we attend the interviews, they will ask the they will ask to write the ML code in interviews,
Mhm.
or they will ask the syntax. Right?
They'll ask the syntax, the overview skeleton of the YAML. They're normally going to ask the syntax, and they're going to ask some questions like, if I put this here, what will happen? How exactly you declare that, and so on and so forth out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys? All right, so
Normally,
that's it from my
in the
Yeah, please, sorry.
stages,
Sorry, go
normally
ahead,
in the
please.
stages, while we are writing stages, right? So in the
Mm-hmm.
stages, normally we have only to build and deploy.
Build and deploy, yes, but even in the deployment stage, right, you can have your development as one stage, QA as one stage, production as one stage. You can have multiple stages in that way when you do a deployment out here as such.
Oh, okay.
Yes, any more questions? And I'll fix this issue. Let's see how it goes out, and I'll report back out here tomorrow. All
Sure,
right,
Kiran.
thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yep,
Thank
thanks,
you. Bye.
guys, and have a good day ahead. And please try to, let's say, draft out your pipelines, and tomorrow we'll try to look at the releases as well, and how can you introduce a release, and how can we work with the release out here as such. Thank you, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.